So people come to see me with incomplete panels, meaning they have very just basic panels run. And the other thing I want to talk about is standard lab values that you're compared against versus functional health lab values, physiological values. So when you're compared against your community on your typical blood test, that is a standard panel comparing you against other people that are in your system, that are getting tested, that may be sick, and so they have a broad spectrum of allowances of what's normal, when the reality of what's normal is what is physiologically normal. Typically people come in with incomplete thyroid panels when they come see me. They have a TSH, and the doctor might even run a T4, looking at things. So, but what I typically see, what I run on people, is about nine panels looking at your thyroid. We look at your thyroid stimulating hormone. We look at T4. We look at T3. We look at free T4 and free T3. We also look at reverse T3, T3 uptake, TPO antibodies, thyroglobulin binding antibodies, and possibly TSI antibodies if you're having a hyperthyroid condition, so that we can see where in the process of the thyroid is the breakdown or malfunction. I help regulate a patient's thyroid function back to normal by viewing the lab normals with functional ranges. According to the American Academy of Clinical Endocrinologists, the TSH range is 1.8 to 3.0, not the 0.2 to 5.0 allowance. So we can really look at how well is it functioning. The other thing we need to talk about is active and inactive hormones. Bound hormones versus free hormones. You actually have to have free hormones in order to utilize them. When they're bound to a protein carrier. They're being distributed throughout the tissues, and they're not released. So what we measure is free amounts, so we can really look and see. But the other thing is there's a conversion factor. You don't just make free hormones, because if your thyroid malfunction and release a whole bunch of it, you can have a heart attack. So your body has this innate ability to develop the amount of high thyroid it needs, the hormone it needs. And it does that through other parts of your systems of your body. So when it releases hormones originally, it releases a little T3 and some T4. Then the T4 gets converted into T3 over time through different body systems, and one of them is the liver. About 60% of it is developed through a processing and synthesized through the liver. So if your liver is not functioning properly, if they haven't done a proper liver clearance panel, then you're not going to have enough. You're going to have symptoms of hypothyroidism, and then really it's not a thyroid problem, it's a synthesis problem. You can have gut function problems, because gut also converts about 30% of that into thyroid hormone that you utilize. So it's not just your thyroid, it's your body systems working properly. How do I specifically treat these thyroid conditions? The first thing is I use specific metabolic markers. The first thing we look at is we want to look for sensitivities. Are you having sensitivities to certain foods? Because we want to look at several different parts of the conversion factor. The first thing we look at is to see if you're allergic to gluten. Gluten sensitivities can be either genetic or developed, and we run tests to determine if you have those, because if you have those, you will have an autoimmune response. You have an active antigen, which is that gluten, stimulating an immune response, which turns around and activates an autoimmune attack against your thyroid. Now, before I go any further, when I talk about immune systems, I run immune panels too. If you have an active immune system that's attacking it as an autoimmune, we need to find out and dampen that, because there's a thing called molecular mimicry. This is one of my big concerns about people not being properly managed with their thyroid. Just by treating them for their thyroid, if you have an autoimmune condition that's not being dealt with and managed, what's going to happen is you're going to have molecular mimicry. Molecular mimicry means that your immune system is looking for a target, it's done chewing up your thyroid, now it moves on to another target. It's going to cause things like multiple sclerosis. It's going to cause things like pancreatic being attacked. It can cause your cerebellum to be attacked because your immune system is revved up and out of control. So the other things we look at, when we look at sensitivities, we test for antibodies for milk, eggs, yeast, and soy. Now when I test antibodies, I don't test antibodies in the bloodstream. That's too far upstream from where the problem is, because your gut is where your antibody is. That's where your IgA is, your response system to the foods. So we're going to test it into the stool. We do a stool test to look for IgA responses, because that is the closest to the source. So we can really find out, do you have food allergies to common things? If you have sensitivities to any of these problems, these food groups, it increases inflammation in your body. If you suffer from Hashimoto's thyroiditis, you need to get off of these foods now. There's some of them, as we repair you and fix your gut systems, you can get back on. It just depends on which sensitivity it is and how severe it is. So here's common problems that we see symptoms-wise associated with these sensitivities. Chronic pain and fatigue, frequent indigestion, bloated after eating, frequent loose bowels, constipation, mouth ulcers, sores, or thrush, a coating on the tongue. These are things that show us that you're having sensitivities. And the only way to find out if you have these sensitivities is to run the test. Complete blood panels, other panels we run. I run a complete metabolic panel. I run a 24-panel test. You know, 10, 15 years ago, they used to run a 24-panel test. Now, your insurances have reduced to the point they run 6 or 7 panels on people. So they're incomplete, they're inconclusive, and they don't change the way your doctor's treating you. We run a full lipid panel. We do a complete blood chemistry panel with auto differential. Okay. When I look at my lipid panels, I'm looking for sugar regulation problems. Most people that have cholesterol regulation problems have sugar regulation problems. So we're looking to see the root cause of why you're having those problems. I also look at complete blood chemistries with auto differential, because you could have an underlying chronic infection, you could have a viral load infection, you could have different things that are contributing to your chronic problem. We assess your adrenal glands, your liver, your kidneys, red and white blood cells, and gut function through tests. All can be affected, causing you to have chronic health conditions and having hypothyroid. By addressing problems with your adrenal glands, blood chemistry, and gut function, we help you heal faster. That's the bottom line. I help people heal faster. The complete metabolic panel allows us to work with you on your blood sugar regulation. You could have swings between hyper and hypo blood sugar regulation problems, and that's probably one of the biggest problems we have in our society is sugar regulation problems. And this is the thing about sugar regulation problems. You need to have regulated fuel for your brain and your nervous system. If you're having problems with glucose and oxygen delivery, you're having problems with your brain and your nervous system. We look at TPO antibodies and TGB antibodies, thyroid globulin antibodies, in cases of suspected autoimmune thyroid disorders. We look at total T4. That's a reflection of how much T4 hormone is in your blood. Free T3 is produced by the thyroid gland. It's converted throughout your systems. It's converted from your liver, your gut. It's considered to be the most biologically active hormone of the thyroid. Free T4, it's another important hormone that we look at. Thyroid binding globulin, we look at that. We test for the amounts of that. This test measures the amount of protein in the blood that's a specific protein that is the bus that your thyroid hormone gets on. It's a carrier hormone or carrier protein, and it carries it around throughout your bloodstream and distributes through the tissues. If you have elevated testosterone levels, they're going to cause you to have lower amounts of thyroid globulin binding levels, so you're not going to be able to carry enough hormone around. You may have the hormone available, but there's no transport system. The other thing is you can have elevated estrogen. Elevated estrogen raises the number of buses, the number of proteins. So you have all of your thyroid hormone is bound then. And so you don't have enough ability to get off the bus. They can both produce symptoms of a hypothyroid. So it doesn't necessarily mean you have a thyroid problem. There's different areas that need to be looked at.